Hey everyone, this is Aaron Von Lupton, writer and music editor for RUE MORGUE magazine, and this is Listen to My Nightmare, where I'm going to be taking you through some of the coolest, weirdest, and most obscure horror music there is. Now, my passion is horror soundtracks, but in this show, I'm going to be taking you well beyond to any place the genre extends its sonic tentacles, from the biggest names in shock rock to some of the more obscure punk, surf, and electronic artists that you've probably never heard of. So sit back, but don't relax too much, because this is Listen to My Nightmare. Hey everyone, so in today's episode of Listen to My Nightmare, we're going to be talking about a passion of mine, horror soundtracks, but specifically why the avant-garde works so well with horror soundtracks. Okay, so first of all, what is the avant-garde? The avant-garde is essentially two things that apply to an artistic movement or to an artist or to a work of art, like a film or a soundtrack, right? So the avant-garde should be, number one, aesthetically innovative, so it's kind of operating outside the confines of what we're normally used to with music or film. And secondly, it's ideologically opposed to the artistic establishment of the time. So in other words, it's a bit of a fuck you to the mainstream. The avant-garde is an artistic movement, piece of work, or artist that's experimental. But in being experimental, it's both artistically innovative, but at the same time, it's also going against societal norms or what society deems to be decent. So when you think about it, the avant-garde does kind of apply to the horror genre, right? The horror genre has always been the outlaw genre. It's always operated outside the confines of what's normal or decent. Its entire purpose is to shock and to horrify. It's no stranger to controversy. And the horror genre really has always operated at its best in midnight movie screenings, grindhouse theaters, or on physical media for weirdos like you and I to discuss. Here's the thing. These days, the horror genre is a lot more mainstream, isn't it? It isn't quite going against the mainstream like it used to. The educated elite, that's people like you and I, we believe that the avant-garde actually promotes radical politics that push for social reform and go against societal norms. And when you think about it, although the horror genre might be a lot more mainstream these days, it's pretty political, isn't it? So if you ask me, the avant-garde is alive and well within the horror genre these days. But how does this apply to horror soundtracks? I don't have the background in music theory to explain it to you, and if I did, no one would be watching this show right now. If you're going to make an avant-garde film, a film that's kind of artistically innovative and going against societal norms, it makes sense to bring in the avant-garde to every single artistic avenue of the film possible, including the music. But on the other hand, sometimes you have a film that's not really that innovative or not really that anti-mainstream. But you bring in the avant-garde to the music, that changes everything. That makes a whole new movie. And we're going to start by looking at our first one, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from New Line Cinema.
So the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's a classic, and it's always been a classic. It was a classic when it first came out, and it's a classic now. But I think that people's impression of the film has changed a lot over the decades. When it was first released, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was synonymous with brutal violence. It ushered in a new era of film brutality into the horror genre. The title itself, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is the most violent fucking name you could ever come up with for a horror film. As time went on and, critics sort of reevaluated it, they did have to point out the fact that, well, actually, there's not that much blood in it. That doesn't mean anything, because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a brutally violent film. It absolutely is. It's just that brutal violence isn't achieved through special makeup effects. It's achieved through things like photography, editing, and of course, the sound. The sound, I would argue, is the number one reason why this film is so fucking brutal. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is absolutely a descent into absolute madness. It is a descent into one woman's madness. It is a descent into the most harrowing nightmare you could possibly think of. And what would it be without all of those sounds in it, right? So let's talk a little bit about that soundtrack. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre score was composed by Wayne Bell and also the director Tobe Hooper. I think we'd be stretching things a little bit to call the Texas Chainsaw Massacre score music per se. It's not really music, is it? It's sound, or as one person put it, it's like Foley work gone too far. If you watch the film and you listen to the score, okay, what you hear bone snapping. You hear flesh sizzling in the sun. You can actually feel the heat of the Texas sun just by listening to the music or the sound in this film. So how this was achieved is it was achieved through an avant-garde technique called Musique, concrète. Now, I've gotten in trouble in the past for completely butchering the definition for musique concrète, so I'm going to try again this time. So musique concrète is essentially a composition technique that uses recorded sound as raw materials. If you were going to do this today, it would be like building a library database, an online database of different sounds. And those sounds could come from actual instruments, but they could also come from field recordings, going outside and recording nature, people's voices, or maybe just banging two pieces of metal together. This is essentially what Wayne Bell and what Tobe Hooper did. They built a library of music, and some of it was real instruments. They used a stand-up bass, they used a steel guitar, they used percussion, but they also used children's instruments. They also used broken instruments. They also banged two things together. They even took a piano and untuned it to give it that kind of weird, sour sound. And throughout the film, the viewer is confronted with all kinds of crazy, eerie sounds that take scenes that are already fucking crazy and making them even more violent. Okay, so I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. If you can recall the scene where Sally runs up to the second floor of the house, and this is where she encounters Grandpa and dead Grandma from the first time, you're gonna hear that sound. And you know which sound I'm talking about, that. That's taking a scene that, you know, would be a nightmare in and of itself, but it just cranks it up to 11 in terms of its eeriness and violence and just how horrifying it is. How that was achieved, Tobe Hooper actually took a pitchfork and he ran it along a table. And that's how he created that sound. I will finish this segment though by mentioning one thing. Okay. The two most predominant sounds in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even above and beyond all these different effects that were created, was one, Sally screaming.
Nobody's gonna hurt you.
No one has screamed in a horror film before or since Sally did, okay? Her screams, I still hear them to this day. And number two, it would be Leatherface's chainsaw. Ubiquitous, all-encompassing roar of this chainsaw, which was the Poulan 306A. They tried to cover up the name by putting a piece of electrical tape on the chainsaw. The green color gives it away. And between that and Sally's screams, the more those increased throughout the film, the more the viewers brought into this complete descent into madness. And by the end of the film, it's all you can really hear. Probably music theorists would contest that idea in the sense that, well, those sounds are matching things that are actually happening in the film. But I'm going to be avant-garde myself and go against the grain and say, you know what? That was part of the score. That was part of the musique concrète. And that is the big reason why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an avant-garde horror show.
This is the horror movie to end them all.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. And my name is, once again, Aaron Von Lupton, and this is Listen to My Nightmare. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And, of course, leave your comments down below. Was it too boring? Is this guy too annoying? Is this guy too stupid? I don't care. Just say whatever you want. Send me your hate mail. I like hate mail, and I like negative attention a lot more than positive attention. Tune in next week for Listen to My Nightmare. I think you're going to like it.